In my wrestling and in my doubts, in my failures, you won't walk out. Your great love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled seas. Oh, you are the peace in my troubled seas. In the silence, you won't let go. In the questions, your truth will mold. Your great love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled seas. Oh, you are the peace in my troubled seas. My lighthouse, my lighthouse, my lighthouse, shining in the darkness, I will follow you. My lighthouse, I will trust the promise, and you will carry me safe to shore. Safe to shore. Safe to shore. Safe to shore. I won't fear what tomorrow brings. With each morning our rising sing. My God's love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled sea. Oh, you are the peace in my troubled seas. Oh, you're my lighthouse, shining in the darkness, I will follow you. Oh, my lighthouse, I will trust the promise, and you will carry me safe to shore. Safe to shore. Safe to shore. Safe to shore. Fire before us.
Fire before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storm.
Fire before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storm. Fire before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storm. Fire before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storm. My lighthouse, shining in the darkness, I will follow you. My lighthouse, I will trust the promise, and you will carry me safe to shore. Safe to shore. Safe to shore. Safe to shore.
My general thoughts on stress and anxiety are the fact that I think they should be taken very seriously. The more stress and anxiety that is piled upon someone, the bigger impact it can have on themselves mentally and even physically, and that will then affect others too.
It's definitely a serious matter, and it's a thing that impacts a lot of people's lives and should be taken very seriously.
And it's like not a lot of people understand and realize that those people who are suffering from things like bipolar disorder and or a split or kind of personality disorder are not necessarily bad people. They're just people that need help. Once we break through that glass ceiling of, well, there's something wrong with them, and look at it as there's something wrong with us because we're not helping with them, I see that we could really push ourselves and our society in a better direction. And that is why I really care about mental health.
I feel like there's a lot that goes on like in your teenage years, so that can just be a stressful time, and then
I feel like high school was really stressful, well, and middle school, just school in general, especially this year if you throw COVID and all of that into the mix.
It can be friends, it can be family issues. There can be a lot of things that can stress me out, and I think that goes with a lot of people too.
I just try to like think about how other people feel like this, and like it's a general thing. Like it's not just me.
I don't know, I try to get more sleep. I try to do things I enjoy and that I know I'm good at. I talk with friends a lot about my issues.
I just kind of like take time to myself if that's what I'm feeling like I need, but then there's other times where I just need to be around people.
Always having someone to talk to, like just giving a quick prayer to God, like help me get through this test, or like help me get through this study session, because you just kind of need someone to talk to about it. So you kind of just have that outlet to like let it all out, which is really helpful in stressful situations.
It always just helps to know that God's there and that He always loves me. He's always just going to be there for me.
Because I go to youth group every week, and I feel like that's always kind of a safe place for me, and it helps me kind of just like get back to earth and just kind of like remind myself that even if I'm going through really stressful times or I'm feeling really anxious or depressed or something, that God's there and He understands, and I don't have to explain it to Him what I'm going through because He knows.
Just remembering what I'm on earth to do, you know, and to pass on the word of God, and just knowing that I'm the way He intended me to be, instead of stressing about what other people want me to be, trying to prove things, because I've already proved that I want to give my life to God and do anything to make Him happy, and I don't have to make anyone else happy.
What's up, RezLife students? It's Blake from Resurrection West. And we're in a series right now talking about stress and faith. Have you ever thought to yourself, I feel like the busiest person in the world? I think about this all the time. And I bet most of us could claim that we lead really busy lives. A really unique thing about your generation, Generation Z, is that you are considered one of the busiest generations the world has ever seen before. What that means is that you have more responsibilities, tasks, activities, and things going on in your day-to-day activities than any other generation before you. And this isn't a bad thing. It means you get to experience different opportunities than maybe people before you, but it also means that you might have added stress in your life. I know for me, I consider myself a very busy person. I've always kind of been that go, go, go person. I've always been looking forward to the next thing that is coming. But there was a season in my life where I had so much going on, big decisions to make, that I felt stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, and just worn out. And I thought, I need someone to help me process all these things. So I saw a therapist who is a person that helps you kind of think through and process those things going on in your mind. And he explained, Blake, it's okay to feel stressed about school, work, and things going on. That's natural. You have a lot going on. But he said there's a difference between feeling stressed and feeling anxious. And he explained, stress is your body's reaction to a threat, whereas anxiety or feeling anxious is a body's reaction to stress. He explained, if I'm being chased by a bear one day, I'm gonna be stressed and run the opposite direction. But if I'm being chased by a bear every single day, I'm probably going to feel anxious every single day because I'm constantly worried about a bear chasing me. This is the difference between what stress can feel like and what feeling anxious can feel like. And it clicked for me. And I understood the difference between the two. And I was able to learn about the things that make me stressed and things that make me feel anxious. But I wanted to take it farther because I wanted to figure out, then how does my faith play into this? How can faith be a tool for navigating those moments in my life that I might be stressed or overwhelmed? And when I was thinking about that question, I thought about the disciples. I always love the disciples because they learn a lot of really hard lessons, and it was hard for them to figure out things on the first try. I know that's true for me too, I'll admit it. And in the book of Mark, there's 2 times that the disciples cross a sea. They get in a boat and they cross the sea. And both times, there's issues that arise for the disciples. So we're going to read our first passage, and while you're reading this, I want you to put yourself in the story. Think of yourself as a disciple and say, what would be going through my mind while this is happening? So hear these words from Mark 4:35 through 41, which say, "On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat just as he was. Other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And he woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. And he said to them, 'Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, 'Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?'" So think about yourself as if you were a disciple in that story. You can't blame the disciples for being overwhelmed. They're in this boat out on the sea. This terrible storm is happening. They probably think they're going to die, and Jesus is asleep in the boat. I love that Jesus is asleep in it. And they wake him up, and they start accusing Jesus, saying, "Don't you care about us? Don't you care if we're going to perish?" And what Jesus does is he tells the sea and those around him, "Peace, be still." And everything is calmed. He's explained to the disciples in the boat that they are really struggling to identify that Jesus is a source for them in that stressful moment. And in that moment, Jesus provided for the disciples in that moment that they were completely overwhelmed by what was going to happen. But Jesus was saying, "Hey, I'm here. I'm by your side." Now stay with me. We have one more story in the book of Mark, that second sea crossing. And this comes from Mark 6:49 through 52, just a little bit later on. And right before this was that story about Jesus feeding the 5,000 people. And then Jesus sends them in a boat alone without them. So here it is, that story. When evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he, Jesus, was alone on the land. And when he saw that they were straining at the oars against an adverse wind, he came towards them early in the morning, walking on the sea. And he intended to pass them by. When they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And then he got into the boat, and then the wind ceased. And they were utterly astonished, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Do you hear how the story seems similar, but it's also a little bit different than what we just read about? What's similar is that the disciples are all in the boat again, and there's a storm happening around them. The only difference is that in the first story, Jesus was in the boat. But in the other story, Jesus walks to the boat. The disciples were overwhelmed, stressed, and probably anxious the second time because the same thing kept happening. But Jesus meets them where they are at and calms everything around them. It's powerful to know that Jesus is always in the boat with us, but in those moments where it might feel like Jesus isn't in the boat, Jesus is still willing to walk towards us. And what these stories are explaining, that Jesus is with us in the present, but also willing to come to us when we are in need. And what we have to remember in those moments is that Jesus is never leaving us. Jesus is always there. When we are stressed, it is easy to feel like Jesus isn't with us because of all the distractions and things that are surrounding us. But Jesus promises us that Jesus is always going to show up wherever we're at, whether that's with us in the boat or willing to come to us wherever we are. Students, I encourage you to think about your life and those moments or things that make you feel stressed or anxious. And then I encourage you to think about, where do you see Jesus in this? Do you feel like Jesus is right there with you in those moments? Or do you maybe need to look up and see where Jesus might be walking towards you in those moments? I invite you to invite Jesus into that space the next time you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed. and allow yourself to learn, how is Jesus still working? Students, may you remember that you are loved and cared for by Jesus in this church. And in those moments that we experience that are stressful or overwhelming or anxious in our life, that Jesus is a source, always willing to come to us, to meet us where we're at. So may we have the faith to learn that and the faith to see Jesus around us every single day.